Millionaire made an unthinkable proposal to a pregnant and lonely housekeeper. He didn't offer money. He didn't offer ordinary help. He offered something that no one expected. When he asked if he could be the child's father, everything changed in an unexpected way. If this beautiful story of overcoming obstacles and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Continuing. The house always functioned like a Swiss watch. Every piece in the right place, every movement calculated, every sound predicted. Arthur Sterling had built his life this way, with the same precision he used to manage his businesses. At 42, he commanded a financial empire that spanned 3 states, but his greatest achievement, according to himself, was the perfect order he maintained around him. In his mansion in Chicago's Gold Coast, everything happened without surprises. The housekeeper arrived at 7 in the morning, the gardeners worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the driver was always available 15 minutes before necessary. Arthur did not tolerate the unforeseen. He had learned over the years that control was the only guarantee against chaos, and chaos, he knew all too well, destroyed everything. That Tuesday in March, however, something different happened. Sitting at the dining table reviewing reports while having breakfast, Arthur noticed unusual movement in the kitchen. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had worked with him for over 10 years, was talking in a low voice with someone. It wasn't just a casual conversation. There was a tone of guidance, almost maternal, that caught his attention. He looked up from his tablet for the first time that morning. Through the half-open door, he saw a young woman from behind. Brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, impeccably tidy uniform, careful posture. She held a dish towel and listened intently to Mrs. Gable's instructions, nodding in agreement. There was something discreet about her every move, as if she were constantly trying to occupy as little space as possible. Arthur went back to his tablet, but his concentration was no longer the same. Minutes later, Mrs. Gable entered the dining room to collect the cups. He waited for her to finish before asking in his usual neutral tone, "New employee?" Mrs. Gable nodded, organizing the tray carefully. "That's right, Mr. Sterling. Lily started today. She's going to help in the kitchen and with the organization of the house. Fiona asked for a transfer to the Lake Forest branch last week, so we needed someone." He just nodded his head, indicating he understood. He didn't ask questions about the employees' personal lives. He wasn't discourteous, but he kept his distance. It was safer that way, cleaner, less complicated. Throughout that entire week, Lily remained practically invisible. Arthur saw her in glimpses, always in motion, always concentrated on some task. She worked in silence, with a discreet efficiency that didn't draw attention, but also didn't go unnoticed. Unlike other employees who talked to each other during work, Lily seemed to prefer the silence. And when she needed to speak, she used few words, always polite, always accompanied by an apology. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling, sorry for the intrusion." She said this every time she needed to pass him in the hallways, every time she entered a room where he was, every time she needed to move something, clean something, exist in a space he occupied. Arthur never replied. He just nodded briefly, signaling she could proceed, but he began to notice the frequency with which she apologized, as if her presence were always a nuisance, as if being there were a temporary privilege that could be revoked at any moment. It was on Friday that he noticed. He was in his office in the afternoon when he heard a muffled noise coming from the hallway. He stood up and opened the door, finding Lily crouched on the floor, picking up pieces of a vase that had fallen. She worked fast, her hands trembling, gathering the shards carefully so as not to cut herself. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I tripped. I wasn't paying attention. I'll clean it all up right now, don't worry." Her voice carried more than embarrassment. There was fear, real fear of consequences. Arthur stood still for a moment, observing. She didn't look up. She continued picking up the pieces, fast and efficient, like someone who was used to correcting mistakes before anyone noticed. Then he saw it. When Lily stood up, holding the shards in one hand and the floorcloth in the other, her belly became more evident under the uniform. It wasn't very large yet, but it was there, unmistakable. She was pregnant. Arthur felt something strange cross his chest. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was more like recognition, as if in that instant several pieces began to fit together. The excessive discretion, the constant apologies, the way she tried to disappear while she worked. It all made sense now. She expected him to say something. She expected a scolding, perhaps a warning. But Arthur just stepped aside, clearing the way. No need to apologize, it was an accident. Lily looked up for the first time, surprised. He didn't wait for a response. He went back into the office and closed the door, but he couldn't resume work immediately. He stood there still before the window that looked out onto the garden, thinking about how she held the shards with care, even while rushed. Thinking about the fear in her voice. Thinking about the belly she tried to hide under the loose uniform. Thinking about how, for the first time in years, someone inside that house seemed to carry a heavier weight than his own. That night before leaving, Mrs. Gable knocked on the office door. Arthur was finishing answering emails when she entered, carrying a tray with tea. "Mr. Sterling, I brought some tea. You didn't even eat dinner properly today." He thanked her with a nod, but didn't touch the cup immediately. Mrs. Gable remained there for a moment, as if she wanted to say something. Arthur knew that posture. She had worked with him long enough to know when she could speak freely. "Something on your mind, Mrs. Gable?" The housekeeper adjusted the tray on the table, choosing her words carefully. "Lily is a good girl, Mr. Sterling. Hard-working, polite, no trouble at all. She really needs this job." Arthur looked up from the computer. "I know." Mrs. Gable nodded, satisfied. She didn't need to say anything else. He had understood. She left the office in silence, leaving only the aroma of the tea in the air. Arthur stared at the cup for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and made a call to the Human Resources Department. The conversation was brief and direct. He wanted a complete review of the benefits offered to the household staff. Health insurance, time off, work hours, everything needed to be re-evaluated. He didn't mention Lily specifically. He didn't need to. He knew that any change directed only at her would be noticed, interpreted, and possibly rejected. If he was going to do something, it had to be broad. It had to benefit everyone. It had to seem like just a common administrative decision. But as he hung up the phone and finally drank the now lukewarm tea, Arthur knew it wasn't. For the first time in a long time, he was making a decision that had nothing to do with profit, efficiency, or control. It had to do with something he couldn't name yet. Something that bothered him deeply, and at the same time made him feel more present than he had been in years. The following weekend, Arthur didn't travel to his beach house as he usually did. He stayed at the mansion, reviewing documents and organizing pending matters. But every now and then, he caught himself looking out the office window at the garden, where Lily sometimes passed carrying laundry baskets or flower pots. She never looked up. She never slowed her pace. She never stopped to rest. And that, Arthur realized, bothered him more than it should. Because he recognized it. He recognized the need to prove one's worth every second. He recognized the fear of stopping and being considered expendable. He recognized the loneliness of carrying everything alone. He had built an entire life, trying to forget what it felt like to feel that. And now, watching Lily cross the garden with careful steps and her hand resting discreetly on her back, he remembered. He remembered a time when he also had nothing. A time when he also needed to prove he deserved to be where he was. A time when he was also completely alone. The difference was that he had managed to get out of that place. He had fought, built, and won. He had transformed fragility into strength, lack into abundance, and fear into absolute control. But Lily didn't have that possibility, not yet, and maybe she never would if no one did anything. Arthur stepped away from the window and returned to his desk. He opened his laptop and began drafting a memorandum, not directed at anyone specific, just a business decision, a change in internal policy. Starting that Monday, all resident staff would be entitled to mandatory breaks during the workday. There would be an adequate rest area. No one would work more than 6 consecutive hours without a break. And pregnant women would have priority for less strenuous tasks. He reread the text 3 times before sending it. It wasn't charity. It was just organization. It was just efficiency. It was just ensuring that the people under his responsibility had adequate working conditions. It was just that. At least that's what he repeated to himself as he pressed the send button. But when Lily passed by the window again, carrying less weight than before, he couldn't help a slight sigh of relief. And it was in that moment that Arthur understood that something had changed. Not in the house, not in the routine, not in the rules, but in him. For the first time in many years, the perfect control he valued so much was beginning to show flaws. And strangely, it didn't scare him as much as it should have. The changes arrived the following Monday, discreet as everything Arthur did, but impossible to ignore. When Lily arrived for the morning shift, she found Mrs. Gable reorganizing the work schedule. There was now a mandatory 15-minute break every 3 hours. A room that previously served as a pantry had been transformed into a break room with a comfortable sofa, a small refrigerator, and even a small table with magazines. And most surprisingly, no one would work more than 6 consecutive hours without an adequate break. Lily listened to everything in silence, with the neutral expression she had perfected over the years. She thanked her politely and went back to work, but something inside her tightened. She knew that kind of kindness all too well. She knew that everything that came easily could be taken away just as fast. In the following days, she noticed other changes. The health insurance had been expanded, including full coverage for expectant mothers. The heavier tasks were redistributed, and she began to work more in the office and the library, organizing documents and caring for plants, far from the hot kitchen and the constant back and forth of the service area. And all of this happened without anyone mentioning a single word about her pregnancy. Lily wasn't naive. She knew exactly what was happening. The changes had started right after the vase incident, right after Mr. Sterling saw her pregnant. The coincidence was too obvious to be ignored. On Thursday, when Mrs. Gable suggested she rest a bit in the new break room, Lily refused with a polite smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Gable. I prefer to keep working." The housekeeper frowned, concerned. "Child, you need to take care of yourself. It doesn't cost anything to sit down for a little while." But Lily had already left, carrying a stack of books to reorganize in the library. To accept that would be to admit weakness. It would be to confirm that she needed special treatment, and she couldn't afford that luxury. Arthur watched everything from a distance, without interfering directly. He saw Lily refuse the breaks, work more than necessary, and avoid the break room as if it were a trap. And the more she resisted, the more he understood. She didn't trust him, and she had reasons for that. It was on a Friday afternoon that the first real contact happened. Arthur was in the library looking for an old report he needed to review when Lily entered carrying a box of books. She stopped at the entrance upon seeing him, clearly surprised. "Sorry, Mr. Sterling, I didn't know you were here. I'll come back later." He raised his hand, indicating there was no problem. "You can come in, I'm just looking for a document." Lily hesitated but obeyed. She placed the box on the side table and began organizing the books on the shelves, working in silence. Arthur continued searching through the folders, but his concentration was not the same. He was conscious of her presence, of the soft sound of the books being slotted in, of her breathing, which was a bit heavier than it should be. After a few minutes, he finally found what he was looking for, but instead of leaving immediately, he stood still, watching Lily stretch her arm to reach a higher shelf. She had to stand on her tiptoes, carefully maintaining her balance. Before he could think twice, Arthur approached. "Let me get that." Lily turned, startled. He was already beside her, taking the book from her hand and placing it on the high shelf with ease. When he stepped back, she remained still, looking at him with an expression that mixed surprise and suspicion. "Thank you." Her voice came out low, almost reluctant. Arthur nodded and went back to the table, picking up the report he had found. But before leaving, he stopped at the door and looked back. "Lily, if you need help with anything, just ask. You don't have to do everything alone." She stared at him for a long moment. There was something in her eyes he couldn't decipher. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't anger. It was something deeper, more complicated. "I'm used to doing things alone, Mr. Sterling, but thank you." The answer came firm, almost like a warning. Arthur understood the message. She didn't want to be saved. She didn't want to depend on anyone. She just wanted to be left in peace to take care of herself, as she always had. He nodded briefly and left, but the conversation echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. That night, Mrs. Gable appeared in the office again, this time without a tea tray. She had the expression of someone who needed to say something important. "Mr. Sterling, may I have a word?" He gestured to the chair in front of the desk. Mrs. Gable sat down with her usual upright posture, but there was genuine concern on her face. It's about Lily. She's not taking the changes well. She's working beyond her hours, refusing breaks, won't use the break room. I'm worried, Mr. Sterling. She's almost 6 months pregnant and she's pushing herself too hard. Arthur interlaced his fingers on the table, thoughtful. Have you spoken to her? I tried, but she's very guarded. She won't accept help from anyone. It's as if she's afraid to trust. He was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then he sighed. Give her time, Mrs. Gable. Some people need to convince themselves that they aren't being deceived. The housekeeper nodded, but still seemed worried. Do you know her story? Arthur shook his head. Mrs. Gable took a deep breath before continuing. She came from Kentucky, lost her previous job when they found out she was pregnant. The father of the child disappeared when she told him. Her family practically abandoned her. She arrived here alone, with no one, trying to start over. When I hired her, she cried, Mr. Sterling. She said this was her last chance. The words fell heavy in the air. Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't pity exactly. It was recognition. It was the feeling of being in front of someone who fought against the whole world, alone, without a safety net. As he had once fought. I understand. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Gable. The housekeeper stood up, satisfied that she had fulfilled her mission. Before leaving, she turned once more. She's a good girl, Mr. Sterling. She just needs a little time to believe that things can be different. After Mrs. Gable left, Arthur was alone in the office, looking at the dark window. He thought of Lily, of everything she had lost, of everything she still fought to protect. He thought of the strength required to keep standing when everything around was crumbling. And he thought about how easy it was to judge someone without knowing the full story. The following week, he changed his strategy. He stopped trying to make things easier specifically for her. He stopped making changes that could be interpreted as favoritism. Instead, he began to be more present. He started working in the library some afternoons, instead of staying locked in his office. He didn't speak to Lily directly, but he was there, present, sharing the same space. Sometimes he asked her to bring a certain book or document. Other times they just worked in silence, each focused on their own tasks. And slowly, the silence between them stopped being uncomfortable. Lily began to relax. Not completely, but enough to stop apologizing every time she entered the library. Enough to accept a glass of water when he offered. Enough to eventually ask a question about where to store a certain book. It was in one of those moments of shared silence that Arthur noticed something that surprised him. Lily had a unique way of organizing things. She didn't just follow alphabetical order or subject matter. She created connections. She placed philosophy books near novels that explored similar themes. She grouped biographies by related historical periods. She organized in a way that made narrative sense, not just practical sense. You have an interesting way of organizing this. Lily looked up, surprised by the comment. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation that wasn't strictly functional. Sorry if it's not the way you prefer. I can reorganize it. He shook his head. It's not a criticism. It's an observation. You think differently. You see connections that most people don't notice. Lily stood still, not knowing how to respond. She was used to criticism, to orders, to indifference, but not to this, not to genuine recognition. I've always liked reading. I think that's why I can see how stories talk to each other. Her voice came out low, almost timid. Arthur nodded, returning to the document he was reading. But something had changed in that moment. A door had opened, even if only a crack. In the following days, the conversations became a bit more frequent. Nothing deep, nothing invasive. Just comments about books, about the organization of the library, about small details that previously went unnoticed. Arthur discovered that Lily had read much more than he imagined. She knew classic authors, had formed opinions on literature, and appreciated poetry. He discovered that she wrote, sometimes, small texts that she kept to herself. He discovered that behind the discretion and silence, there was a sharp and sensitive mind. And Lily, in turn, began to realize that Arthur was not just the cold and distant businessman she had imagined. He listened when she spoke. He asked genuine questions. He respected her opinions, even when he disagreed. And, more importantly, he never tried to invade her space or ask overly personal questions. But she still didn't trust him completely. She still kept the barriers up. She still expected that at any moment that kindness would reveal itself to be a trap. It was on a rainy afternoon that something different happened. Lily was organizing documents when she felt a sharp pain in her back. She tried to hide it, continuing her work, but the pain intensified. She leaned discreetly against the shelf, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. When she opened them, Arthur was standing there watching her with a worried expression. "Are you all right?" "I am. Just a passing pain." The answer came automatically, defensive, but he didn't move. "Sit down, I'll get some water." Before she could refuse, he had already left. Lily stood there, torn between the pride that told her to keep working and the body that begged for a moment of rest. When Arthur returned with the glass of water, she finally gave in and sat in the library armchair. He handed her the glass and stepped back, giving her space. He didn't ask questions, he didn't offer unsolicited advice. He just went back to the desk and continued working as if nothing had happened. But Lily noticed. She noticed that he slowed the pace of his work, staying longer in the library that afternoon. She noticed that he didn't ask for any more documents that required her to stand up. She noticed that every now and then he looked discreetly in her direction, checking to see if she was okay. And for the first time, Lily allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, that kindness was genuine. When the afternoon ended and she prepared to leave, Arthur was putting away his documents. She hesitated at the door before speaking. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for today." He looked up and nodded, with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't condescension, it was just silent recognition. Lily left the library with a strange feeling in her chest, something between fear and hope, between suspicion and the will to believe. And Arthur stood still, looking at the door through which she had left, knowing that something fundamental had changed. He no longer just wanted to ensure she was well. He wanted to know her. He wanted to understand how someone could carry so much weight and still find beauty in small things. He wanted to know what other stories she kept inside her. And that, he realized with a shiver, was dangerous. Because a long time ago he had learned to keep his distance. He had built high walls around himself to avoid exactly this, to avoid connections that could destabilize the careful control he maintained over his own life. But Lily, without even trying, was crossing those walls. And for the first time in years, Arthur wasn't sure if he wanted to stop her. The following weeks brought a subtle but undeniable change in the house's dynamic. Arthur and Lily had developed a kind of shared rhythm, a silent dance of presence and mutual respect. He worked in the library almost every afternoon now, and she organized books, documents, and plants with the same careful attention as always. The conversations, which started timid and functional, gained depth. They talked about books, about the city, about small observations of daily life. Lily discovered that Arthur had a subtle, almost imperceptible sense of humor that revealed itself in unexpected comments. And Arthur discovered that she saw the world with a unique perspective, finding beauty and meaning in places where he had never thought to look. But Lily still kept her distance. She never spoke about herself, about the past, or about the pregnancy, and Arthur respected that, without asking questions that could invade forbidden territory. Until one afternoon in April, everything changed. Lily was organizing a collection of poetry when she found an old book with a worn cover and yellowed pages. She recognized it immediately. It was a rare edition of Emily Dickinson, one of her favorite authors. She couldn't resist. She sat in the armchair and began to read, forgetting for a moment where she was. Arthur watched her discreetly, seeing the transformation in her face. There was a softness there that he rarely saw, a peace that seemed to come from very deep within. "You like poetry?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Lily looked up, a bit embarrassed for being caught reading during work. "Sorry, I shouldn't be—" he interrupted with a gesture. "No need to apologize. You can read whenever you want, the library is here for that." Lily closed the book delicately, but didn't return it to the shelf. She held it against her chest for a moment, as if she were deciding something. "My mother used to read poetry to me when I was little. Emily Dickinson was her favorite. She said the verses helped to understand what normal words couldn't explain. It was the first time she had mentioned something personal, the first time she opened a crack in the wall carefully built around herself." Arthur realized the importance of that moment and chose his words with care. Your mother was right. Some things can only be said indirectly. Lily watched him for a long moment, as if she were evaluating how much she could trust him. Then slowly she began to speak. She passed away when I was 16. Since then, poetry has kind of become my way of keeping her memory alive. Arthur nodded, understanding the weight of that revelation. He didn't offer empty condolences or try to minimize the pain. He just recognized in silence that it was important. You write too. It wasn't a question. He had noticed the notebook she sometimes carried, the way she looked at things with the attention of someone recording details to later transform into words. Lily smiled, a small but genuine smile. Sometimes. Nothing that's very good, but it helps me organize my thoughts. Arthur stood up and went to the shelf, picking up a new leather-bound notebook he kept there. He offered it to her. Then you're going to need a better place to write. Keep this one. Lily looked at the notebook as if it was something precious. She hesitated, the instinct to refuse fighting with the desire to accept. Finally, she reached out and took the gift, holding it with care. Thank you. The voice came out low, laden with emotion she was trying to control. In that moment, something changed definitively between them. It was no longer just professional respect or distant kindness. It was connection. It was mutual recognition. It was the beginning of something that neither of them knew how to name yet. In the following days, the conversations deepened even more. Lily began to open up, talking about Kentucky, about her childhood, about the dreams she had before everything fell apart. Arthur, in turn, shared fragments of his own story. He talked about how he had built the business from scratch, about the years of struggle, about the loneliness that came with success. And at some point in those shared afternoons, Arthur realized that he looked forward to those moments. He waited to see Lily enter the library, to hear her voice, to share the comfortable silence that had been established between them. He was falling in love. The discovery hit him with the force of a punch to the gut. He who had spent years avoiding any emotional involvement, who had built walls so high around his heart, was falling. And falling fast. It was on a Friday afternoon that he decided to do something about it. Lily was watering the plants in the library when he approached. She looked up, surprised by the proximity. "Lily, I need to talk to you." The serious tone gave him away. She put down the watering can and stood still, waiting. Her heart raced without her understanding exactly why. Arthur took a deep breath, choosing his words with care. "I know this may seem inappropriate. I know there is a difference in our positions, and that makes everything more complicated. But I can no longer pretend that this is just a professional acquaintance." Lily felt the ground move under her feet. She knew where this was going, and every instinct inside her screamed danger. "I like being near you. I like talking to you. I like how you see the world, how you find beauty in the simplest things. And I wanted to know if you might feel the same." The silence that followed was dense, heavy. Lily stared at him, and Arthur saw something pass through her eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was fear. It was anger. It was pain. When she finally spoke, her voice came out cold and controlled. "Do you know what I find funny, Mr. Sterling? I spent weeks trying to understand why I was being treated differently, why the changes, why the kindness, why the attention. And now I understand." She took a step back, moving away from him. "You're not offering anything real. You're trying to fill a void. You're trying to feel noble, generous, necessary. And you chose the most convenient person for that. The pregnant employee, abandoned, alone. The one who should be grateful for any crumb of attention." The words came out sharp, precise. Arthur felt each of them like a blow. "It's not that." He tried to explain himself, but she interrupted him. "Isn't it? Then tell me, Mr. Sterling, would you have even noticed my existence if I weren't pregnant? If I weren't clearly in need of help? Or would I be just another invisible employee passing through the hallways?" The question hung in the air. Arthur had no answer, because deep down she was right. He had noticed Lily precisely because of her vulnerability. He had approached because he saw someone who needed protection. But it wasn't just that. Not now, not after knowing her for real. "Lily, please listen to me." "No, you listen to me now." Her voice trembled, but it didn't lose its firmness. "I've been through this before. I've believed in beautiful words, in promises, in kind gestures, and in the end I was always the only one left. It was always me alone dealing with the consequences. So don't come here and tell me you feel something, because feeling is easy when there's no real risk. Feeling is easy when you can go back to your perfect and controlled life whenever you want. She took a deep breath, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. You don't know what it's like to build something real, because you've always had everything within reach. You don't know what it's like to fight for every cent, to wake up not knowing if you'll have food the next day, to carry a child alone without being sure if you'll be able to give him the minimum dignity. You live in a world of control and predictability. I live in a world where everything can crumble at any second. Arthur stood still, absorbing every word. She was right. She was completely right. He didn't know. Not really. He had forgotten what it was like to live without a safety net. He had forgotten the constant fear, the insecurity, the feeling of always being on the edge of the abyss. And in trying to help her, in trying to approach her, he had done exactly what she accused him of. He had treated the situation as something he could control, as a problem he could solve. "You're right." The words came out low but firm. Lily blinked, surprised. She didn't expect him to agree. "You're right about everything. I don't know what it's like to live as you live. I don't know what it's like to carry the weight you carry. And maybe I really did see you initially as someone who needed protection. But that changed, Lily. It changed when I started to know who you really are." He took a step forward but maintained a respectful distance. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, stronger than any executive I've ever faced, stronger than any adversary in business, because you keep standing even when everything conspired to bring you down, and that doesn't make me want to protect you, it makes me want to be by your side." Lily shook her head, backing away further. "You don't understand, you can't understand, because for you this is a choice, an emotional adventure, something new and different in your organized life. But for me, it's survival. And I can't afford the luxury of trusting someone who can simply change their mind when they realize that reality is harder than they imagined." She grabbed her bag and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "I'm not going to be another convenient solution in your life, Mr. Sterling. I'm not going to be the project that makes you feel human again. I deserve more than that. My son deserves more than that." And then she left, leaving Arthur alone in the library. He stood still for a long time, her words echoing in his mind. Every accusation, every painful truth, every legitimate fear. She had stripped away all the layers of rationalization he had built and exposed the raw truth underneath. He had approached her initially because of her vulnerability. He had offered help as a way to fill the void inside himself. He had treated the situation as something he could manage, control, and resolve. But now, sitting alone in the empty library, Arthur understood that it wasn't enough to feel something. It wasn't enough to want to be near. It wasn't enough to offer help. Because Lily didn't need someone to save her. She needed someone to stay, and there was a huge difference between those two things. That night he didn't sleep. He stayed awake thinking about everything she had said, every word, every accusation, and for the first time in a long time, Arthur was forced to face the truth about himself. He had built an entire life based on control because he was afraid. Afraid of losing, afraid of suffering, afraid of being vulnerable again as he had been in the past. And that fear had made him distant, cold, and incapable of real connections. Lily had exposed that. She had shown that he didn't know how to love for real because he had never truly risked himself. He always kept cards up his sleeve, always had an emergency exit, always protected himself. But she didn't have that luxury. She lived without a safety net, without a plan B, without guarantees, and yet she kept standing, kept fighting, kept believing she could build something better. And he, who thought himself strong for having built an empire, realized he knew nothing about true strength. When the sun rose, Arthur made a decision. He wouldn't try to convince her with words. He wouldn't make empty promises or grand romantic gestures. He wouldn't pressure or insist. He would prove it with actions, not actions directed specifically at her because that would just be more control, but actions that showed who he really wanted to be, that showed he was willing to change not to win her over, but because she was right. He needed to learn how to build something real, and that started by stopping trying to solve everything. It started by simply being present, without control, without guarantees, without protection, just as she lived every day. When Monday arrived, Lily went back to work as if nothing had happened. She maintained professional distance, avoided the library, and focused on her tasks with the same efficiency as always. And Arthur let her do that. He didn't try to talk. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't try to force proximity. He just continued doing his work, respecting her space, proving through silence that he wasn't going away. Even when rejected, even without guarantees, even without control, and for the first time in his life, Arthur understood what it really meant to choose someone. Not when it was easy, not when there was certainty, not when everything was under control, but exactly when there was none of that. When all that was left was the simple, difficult, scary decision to stay. And he stayed. The days that followed were marked by a heavy but different silence. It wasn't the comfortable silence they had shared before. It was the silence of two people who had exposed too much and now needed to rebuild barriers. Lily went back to her routine with iron determination. She woke up early, worked with the same efficiency as always, and avoided the library and any situation that could result in prolonged encounters with Arthur. When they inevitably crossed paths in the hallways, she kept her head down, murmured a polite greeting, and moved on. Arthur respected her space. He didn't try to initiate conversations, he didn't force proximity, and he didn't seek justifications. He just continued his routine, working and observing, present but distant. But something had changed in him, and not just in relation to Lily. In the second week after the confrontation, Arthur called an extraordinary meeting with all the managers of his companies. The theme surprised everyone, a complete restructuring of human resources policies. He didn't mention Lily. He didn't mention the conversation in the library. But every decision he made in that meeting carried the echo of her words. He expanded maternity leave for all employees, including free psychological support postpartum. He created a professional training program that allowed employees in operational positions to develop and grow within the company. He established a policy of salary transparency and equal opportunities, regardless of origin or social condition. These were not cosmetic changes. They were structural transformations that cost money and required real commitment. The managers were perplexed. Some questioned the financial impact. Arthur listened to all the objections with patience and then responded with a phrase that silenced the room. Building an empire on the backs of vulnerable people is not success, it is exploitation, and I don't want to be a part of that anymore. The changes began to be implemented immediately, and Lily, even while maintaining her distance, couldn't help but notice. She saw when the cleaning crew started to have more flexible hours and better working conditions. She saw when employees who were previously treated as invisible began to receive training and real promotion opportunities. She saw when the company created an internal daycare for employees' children with subsidized fees. And she saw that none of this was directed specifically at her. They were broad, systemic changes that benefited dozens of people. Changes that didn't have the goal of winning her over, but rather of transforming how the company functioned. Mrs. Gable commented on the changes one afternoon while they were organizing the pantry together. "I've never seen anything like it, Lily. Mr. Sterling has always been fair, but now he's different. It's as if he woke up to something that was always there, but he didn't want to see." Lily just nodded, feigning disinterest. But inside something was moving, something she was desperately trying to ignore, because it was easier when Arthur was just the distant businessman. It was easier when she could categorize his kindness as guilt or an attempt at control. But now, seeing the real changes, seeing the impact on other people's lives, she could no longer do that. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to become a better person. And that was infinitely more dangerous for the defenses she had built. The weeks passed. May arrived, bringing constant rain and a cold that Chicago knew well. Lily's belly grew, making her movements slower and more careful. She was 7 months along now, and each day seemed longer and more tiring. But she continued working with the same determination. She refused help, maintained the pace, and proved to herself that she could do it alone. She had always done it alone. It wasn't going to change now. It was on an especially rainy afternoon that something broke. Lily was putting away books when she felt a sudden dizziness. She leaned against the shelf, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. She waited for it to pass, as it always passed, but this time it didn't. Her legs weakened, and she felt her body give way. Before she could fall, firm arms caught her. Arthur had entered the library at that exact moment. He saw Lily lose her balance and ran, catching her before she fell. He supported her weight with care, lowering himself slowly until she could sit on the floor. "Breathe slowly, I'm here." His voice was calm and controlled, but Lily could feel his racing heart through the contact. She tried to pull away, but she was too dizzy. "I'm fine, I just need a minute." "You're not fine. When was the last time you ate something?" Lily didn't answer. The truth was that she had skipped lunch, and breakfast had been just coffee and bread. Money was tight this month, and she needed to save for when her maternity leave started. Arthur understood the silence. He stood up and left quickly, returning minutes later with a glass of juice and some biscuits. He offered them to her without saying anything. Lily hesitated, but the dizziness was too strong. She accepted the juice and drank in small sips. Slowly, the feeling of fainting passed. "Thank you." The word came out low, almost inaudible. Arthur sat on the floor beside her, maintaining a respectful but present distance. They sat there in silence for a few minutes, just waiting for her to fully recover. "Lily, you need to take care of yourself. Not just for you, for the baby too." "I know." The answer came tired and defeated. For the first time since the confrontation, her armor showed cracks. "I know I need to, but it's hard. It's hard when every cent counts. When you have to choose between eating well and ensuring you'll have rent money for next month. When you know maternity leave is going to be a financial nightmare and you have no one to share the burden with." The words came out in an unexpected flow, as if a dam had burst. Arthur just listened without interrupting. "And the worst part is that I can't accept help. Because everything that comes for free always has a hidden price. There's always an expectation you can't meet. There's always someone reminding you of what you owe." She wiped away a stubborn tear that escaped. "I just wanted to make it on my own, to prove I'm strong enough, that I don't need to depend on anyone. But sometimes I'm just so tired of being strong." The silence that followed was dense with emotion. Arthur chose his words very carefully before speaking. "Strength isn't never asking for help, Lily. Strength is knowing when to accept it. And accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He looked at his own hands before continuing. "I spent years thinking strength was controlling everything. It was never needing anyone. It was building walls so high that nothing could reach me. But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that true strength is continuing even when everything conspires against you. It's being vulnerable and still not giving up." Lily looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks. She saw the fatigue in his eyes, the lines of tension around his mouth. She saw that he also carried weight, only a different kind of weight. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Lily. I know I don't deserve that yet, but I'm asking you not to work yourself to death just to prove something. Accept the breaks you need. Take care of yourself. Not for me, for you, and for your son." He stood up, offering his hand to help her up too. Lily hesitated only a second before accepting. When she stood up, he released her hand immediately, respecting her boundaries. "I'm going to have something prepared for you to eat, and I want you to take the rest of the day off. Tomorrow we'll talk about adjusting your workload. And before you refuse, this is not negotiable. It's a matter of health and safety." Lily wanted to argue. She wanted to refuse, but she was too tired. And for the first time she allowed herself to accept. "All right." Arthur nodded and left the library, leaving her alone with her turbulent thoughts. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She lay in the small studio apartment she rented in Bridgeport, looking at the cracked ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. She thought about how Arthur caught her when she was going to fall, how his voice remained calm even when she could feel his racing heart, how he offered food without judgment, how he left when he realized she needed space. She thought about the changes in the company, about the lives that were being impacted, about the real opportunities that were being created. And she thought about how hard it was to maintain barriers when someone didn't try to tear them down, but simply waited patiently on the other side. But the fear was still greater than the hope, because Lily had learned in the hardest way possible that trusting was dangerous, that getting attached to someone only made the loss more devastating, that it was better to be alone and safe than accompanied and vulnerable. In the following days, Arthur kept his word. He adjusted her workload, ensuring she didn't work more than 4 hours a day. He arranged for her to have adequate meals during her shift. He created an environment where she could rest when necessary. And he did all of this without asking for anything in return, without mentioning the conversation in the library, without demanding gratitude. Lily watched, fighting internally. Part of her wanted to believe. She wanted to allow herself to trust. She wanted to imagine that maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. But the other part, the part that had been hurt so many times, screamed a warning. It remembered all the broken promises, all the frustrated expectations, all the times she lowered her guard and got hurt. And it was that louder voice that won. One night, after another conversation with the studio apartment owner about the late rent, Lily made a decision. She needed to leave. Not because Arthur had done anything wrong, but exactly because he hadn't. Because he was being kind, patient, and genuine, and that scared her more than anything else. Because if she stayed, she would end up falling in love. She would end up depending on him. She would end up putting down roots in a place that wasn't hers, and when everything crumbled, as it always did, it would be devastating. Better to leave now. Better to go while she still had strength. Better to protect her son from another disappointment. She looked for jobs in other cities. She sent resumes to Indianapolis, Milwaukee, even some opportunities in rural areas. Anything that would take her away from Chicago. Anything that would put her far from that house, that man, and those dangerous feelings growing inside her. Mrs. Gable noticed the change. She saw Lily was more distant, more closed off, and more tense. She tried to talk, but Lily avoided the subject, keeping her answers short and evasive. And Arthur, who had promised himself he would give her space, that he would wait, that he would prove himself through constant presence, began to feel that something was wrong. He saw her looking out the window with a distant expression. He saw the way she avoided creating connections, as if she were preparing to leave. He saw the sadness hidden behind her tired eyes. And he was afraid, real deep fear that by the time he finally understood how to love for real, it would already be too late. It was on a Friday afternoon that Lily received the call. A company in Indianapolis was offering a position as an administrative assistant. The salary was better. They had benefits for expectant mothers, and they offered help with housing for the first few months. It was the exit she was looking for, the chance to start over far from everything that scared her. She accepted the offer right there on the phone before she could change her mind. And then, without telling anyone, without saying goodbye, without leaving explanations, Lily began to plan her departure. Because running away was what she knew how to do best when things got too real. And Arthur, working in his office, had no idea that time was running out. He had no idea that all his attempts to prove he could stay were about to be tested in the most painful way possible. Because it's easy to promise presence when the person is there. But what happens when she decides to leave? What happens when her fear is greater than his patience? What happens when both are right and wrong at the same time? The answer would come soon, and it would change everything. Lily left on a Monday morning, before the sun had completely risen. There were no goodbyes. There were no explanations. Just a brief letter left on the kitchen table for Mrs. Gable, thanking her for the opportunity and informing her that she had found a better job in another city. When Mrs. Gable found the letter at 7 in the morning, Lily was already on the bus to Indianapolis, looking out the window as Chicago grew more and more distant. The housekeeper went immediately up to Arthur's office with the letter trembling in her hands. He was finishing getting ready for a meeting when she knocked on the door, clearly agitated. "Mr. Sterling, Lily is gone." He stopped in the middle of the movement of adjusting his tie. He turned slowly. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Gable handed him the letter. Arthur read it in silence, each word being absorbed like a blow. When he finished, he stood still, holding the paper, without saying anything. "Did you know she was looking for another job?" Mrs. Gable's voice came out worried, almost accusatory. Arthur shook his head, still processing. "No, I didn't know." But he suspected. Deep down he had noticed the signs, the growing distance, the way she looked at everything as if she were saying goodbye. He should have seen it. He should have done something. But he didn't, because he had promised himself he would give her space, that he would wait, that he would prove himself through constant presence. And now she was gone. Mrs. Gable expected him to say something, to do something. to run after her, to call, to try to bring her back. But Arthur just folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. "All right, Mrs. Gable, thank you for letting me know." The housekeeper was agape. "Just that. You're not going to do anything." Arthur looked out the window at the garden, where he had so often seen Lily pass. Her absence was already palpable, as if the whole house knew something fundamental had been lost. She made a choice, and I need to respect that. Mrs. Gable was going to protest, but something in his expression made her stop. It wasn't indifference she saw there. It was pain, deep, controlled, but undeniable pain. She nodded and left in silence, leaving Arthur alone with his thoughts. He cancelled all his meetings for that day. He stayed in the office trying to work, but the words in the documents made no sense. All he could think about was Lily, how she must be feeling, if she had made the right choice, if there was anything more he could have done. But deep down, Arthur knew there wasn't, because the problem was never a lack of action. It was an excess of fear. Her fear was legitimate, built on years of disappointment and abandonment, and there was no word or gesture that could erase that. Only time, only consistency, only real proof day after day that some people really do stay. And he had promised to stay, but how to prove that if she had left? The first weeks were difficult. The house felt different without Lily. The silence was heavier. The spaces she occupied seemed too empty. Arthur caught himself looking at the library, expecting to see her organizing books. He looked at the garden, expecting to see her pass with that careful step. But she wasn't there anymore. Mrs. Gable tried to fill the absence by hiring someone else, but Arthur refused. He said that for now they could redistribute the tasks. He wasn't ready to see someone else in that space. And then on an afternoon in June, 3 weeks after Lily's departure, he received an unexpected call. It was Mrs. Gable, her voice choked with emotion. "Mr. Sterling, I got her number. Lily's. A former co-worker of hers had the contact. I know you said to respect her choice, but I need to know if she's okay, if she's eating right, if the baby is okay." Arthur was silent for a long moment. The temptation was enormous. He could call, he could check, he could perhaps hear her voice one more time. But it would be an intrusion. It would be disrespecting the distance she needed to create. It would be doing exactly what she feared, which was not respecting her choices. "No, Mrs. Gable, I'm not going to call. But Mr. Sterling, if she needs anything, she knows where to find me. But I'm not going to pursue her. I'm not going to pressure her. I'm going to wait." Mrs. Gable sighed, frustrated but understanding. After a moment, she spoke more quietly. "You really love her, don't you?" The question caught Arthur off guard. He had never used that word, not even to himself. But now in her absence, the answer was clear. "Yes, I do." "Then why don't you go after her?" "Because true love isn't about possession, Mrs. Gable. It's about letting the person be free to choose. And if she chose to leave, I need to respect that, even if it hurts, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done." The housekeeper was silent for a moment before hanging up, leaving Arthur alone with the confirmation he had just made out loud. He loved Lily, and exactly for that reason, he was going to let her go. The weeks turned into months. July arrived, bringing the intense cold to Chicago. Arthur maintained his routine, worked, and implemented more changes in the company. But there was a part of him that remained frozen, waiting. Waiting for a sign, for a message, for anything that indicated that maybe, just maybe, Lily also felt the lack. But nothing came. It was in August, on a rainy Saturday, that fate finally intervened. Arthur was at the supermarket, buying basic things when he saw her. Lily was in the baby products aisle, looking at bottles with a concentrated expression. Her belly was huge now, clearly in the last months of pregnancy. She looked tired, but there was something different about her too. A serenity that wasn't there before. Arthur's heart stopped. All the weeks of waiting, all the contained pain, all the longing he had learned to carry, it all came to the surface at once. He stood still, not knowing what to do. Approach her, speak to her, or simply let her continue her shopping in peace. But then, as if she felt his presence, Lily looked up. And she saw him. Time stopped. They stood there, separated by a few meters of supermarket aisle, looking at each other. There was so much to be said, so much to be explained, so much accumulated weight. It was Lily who made the first move. She put the bottle back on the shelf and walked slowly toward him. She stopped at a safe distance, as she always did. Arthur. Lily! The silence that followed was dense. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was the silence of two people who shared something deep and now didn't know how to navigate the distance. How are you? Arthur's question came low and careful. Lily placed her hand on her belly unconsciously. Good, the baby is healthy, expected in September. He nodded, relieved to hear that everything was okay. And the job in Indianapolis? Lily looked down, biting her lip. It didn't work out. The company closed a deal and cut half the employees. I was among those laid off. Arthur's heart sank. She was back in Chicago because she had lost her job. She was once again without a safety net, 8 months pregnant, and alone. I'm sorry. Lily shrugged, trying to seem unconcerned, but he saw the worry in her eyes. It happens. I'm looking for other opportunities. Something will turn up. There was pride in her voice, pride and determination. But there was also fatigue, the fatigue of someone who had fought a lot and still had much more fighting ahead. Arthur wanted to do so many things in that moment. He wanted to offer a job, money, help, and security. He wanted to say she didn't have to fight alone. He wanted to hug her and promise that everything would be okay. But he knew he couldn't, because she didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be respected in her choices, even when they were difficult. So he said the only thing he could. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Lily looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her eyes he couldn't decipher. Sadness? Regret? Longing? I know, thank you. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something more. But then she just nodded briefly and headed for the checkout, leaving Arthur standing in the aisle. He stood there for a long time, looking at the empty space where she had been, feeling the weight of that encounter. She was back. She was in Chicago. She was fighting again. And he could do nothing but wait for her to maybe decide that she didn't need to fight alone. That night Arthur couldn't sleep. He lay thinking about Lily, the baby that would be born soon, and the impossible choices she faced. And he made a decision. He wasn't going to offer help directly. He wasn't going to try to solve her problems. But he was going to be available. He was going to be present. He was going to ensure that if she decided she wanted support, he would be there. Without pressuring, without demanding, without expecting anything in return. Simply there. And so he waited. He waited for days without news. He waited through weeks of silence. He waited even when it seemed like nothing was going to happen, because he had learned that true love has no expiration date. It has no conditions. It doesn't give up when it gets hard. True love simply stays. And Arthur, for the first time in his life, was willing to stay for as long as necessary, even if it were forever. Even without guarantees, even without knowing if he would be loved back. Because some choices are not made by the head, they are made by the heart. And his heart had chosen Lily. Now he just had to wait to see if her heart would choose him back. The answer would come soon, and it would change both of them forever. It was 2 weeks of absolute silence after the meeting at the supermarket. 2 weeks in which Arthur waited, each day weighing more than the previous one. 2 weeks in which Lily fought with herself, torn between the pride that told her to continue alone and a voice that was becoming increasingly insistent, saying that maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be like this. It was on a Sunday night, when the rain was falling hard over Chicago, that Lily finally made the decision that would change everything. She picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed the number Mrs. Gable had given her months ago, but that she had never had the courage to use. Each ring of the phone seemed like an eternity. She was about to hang up when she heard his voice on the other side. Hello? Arthur's voice sounded surprised, as if he didn't expect that call. Arthur, it's me, Lily. There was a silence on the other side, then quieter, more careful. Lily, are you all right? I am. I need to talk to you in person if possible. Arthur didn't hesitate for a second. Of course, where are you? I'll come to you. Lily gave the address of the small studio in Bridgeport, where she was temporarily living. After hanging up, she stood in the middle of the room, her heart racing, wondering if she had made the right choice. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. When Lily opened the door, she found Arthur standing there, wet from the rain, with an expression of genuine concern. He entered slowly, as if he were afraid of invading her space. The studio was tiny, one room that served as a living room and bedroom, a kitchenette and a bathroom. Old furniture, peeling walls, a single window that looked out onto a dark alley. It was so different from the mansion in the Gold Coast that it hurt to look at. But Arthur showed no judgment. He just waited for her to indicate where he could sit. Lily offered the only available chair and sat on the bed, maintaining a safe distance. They sat there for a moment, just looking at each other, not knowing where to start. It was Lily who broke the silence. "I need to be honest with you about everything." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When I left, it wasn't because you did something wrong. It was because you were doing everything right, and that terrified me. Because I don't know how to deal with people who stay. I only know how to deal with people who leave. It's easier that way. It's safer." Arthur just listened without interrupting. "I spent my entire life building walls, learning not to depend on anyone, believing that if I didn't need anything, I couldn't be disappointed. And then you appeared and started to tear down those walls. Not in an aggressive way, but in a way that was even more dangerous, with patience, with consistency, with presence." Tears began to fall, but she didn't wipe them away. "And I was so afraid. Because if I let you in for real, if I trusted you for real, and then you left like all the others, I wouldn't know how to survive that. Not this time. Not pregnant. Not vulnerable. Not when I'm already at the end of my rope." Arthur stood up slowly and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His eyes shone with contained emotion. "Lily, listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. Not when it gets hard, not when you push me away, not when you're afraid. I'm going to stay. Always. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You stay." The word love hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lily sobbed, all the weight she carried finally finding an exit. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust. I don't know how to let someone take care of me without feeling like I'm losing control. Then we'll learn together, because I don't know either. I spent my whole life thinking that controlling everything was the only way to protect myself. But you showed me it's not. You showed me that true strength is being vulnerable and still not giving up." He squeezed her hands gently. "Lily, I don't want to solve your life. I don't want to make decisions for you. I don't want to be the hero who saves the damsel. I just want to be by your side, in victories and defeats, in good days and bad days. I want to be the person you can trust when everything seems to be crumbling." She looked at him through the tears, seeing the raw sincerity in every word. And then Arthur asked the question that would change everything. "Lily, I know this baby isn't mine biologically. I know I have no right to claim anything. But I want to be present. I want to be a constant presence in his life. I want to be the father he needs, not out of obligation, but by choice, by love. Not love that already exists, but love that I will build day after day." He looked deeply into her eyes. "Will you let me stay? Will you let me be this child's father? Not as a title, but as a presence. As someone who will be there when the first tooth comes in, when the first word is spoken, when he has nightmares in the middle of the night. Let me be the person who won't leave, no matter what." The silence that followed was the most intense they had ever shared. Lily looked at Arthur, really looked at him. She saw the vulnerability there. She saw the fear. She saw the genuine love he offered, without conditions, without guarantees. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe. "Yes," the word came out low, almost inaudible, but it carried the weight of all the walls that were finally crumbling. "Yes?" Arthur needed to be sure he had heard correctly. Lily nodded, the tears falling freely now. "Yes, you can stay, you can be the father, you can be present." Arthur pulled her into a careful hug, respecting the belly between them. And they stayed there, crying together, releasing all the weight they carried, all the fear, all the pain, all the hope that could finally be real. When they separated, Lily had one more thing to say. "But I need you to understand one thing. I'm still going to be afraid. I'm still going to want to run away sometimes. I'm still going to question if this is real. And I need you to have patience when I have those moments." Arthur smiled, wiping her tears with his thumb. "And I need you to understand that I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to want to solve things I can't solve. I'm going to have to learn not to control everything, and I need you to have patience when I fail." She smiled back, a genuine smile without barriers. Then we'll be a disaster together. The best kinds of disasters are shared. In the following weeks, everything changed. Arthur helped Lily move to a better apartment, closer to the mansion, but maintaining the independence she needed. He didn't offer money directly, but he created opportunities. He offered a job as an organization consultant at the company, where she could use her unique skills and work flexible hours. Lily accepted, but established clear boundaries. She wanted to work, she wanted to contribute, and she wanted to maintain her autonomy. And Arthur respected every limit, every need, and every moment when she needed space. When September arrived, bringing the first signs of spring, Lily went into labor in the rainy early hours of the morning. Arthur was by her side at every moment. He held her hand during the contractions. He wiped the sweat from her forehead. He whispered words of encouragement. And when the baby was finally born, a healthy boy with strong lungs, he cried as much as she did. The doctor asked for the name for the record. Lily looked at Arthur, who was holding the baby with a delicacy that contrasted with his large hands. She already knew the name. She had decided weeks ago. Oliver. His name is Oliver. Oliver Sterling. The addition of the surname came from Arthur, a silent question in his eyes. Lily hesitated only a second before nodding. It was a symbol, a commitment, a family that was being built not by blood, but by choice. The first months with Oliver were chaotic. Arthur's perfectly organized house was transformed into a whirlwind of diapers, bottles, night cries, and moments of pure panic when neither of them knew what to do. But they were shared moments, and that made all the difference. Lily discovered that trusting didn't make her weak. She discovered that asking for help when she needed it didn't mean failing. She discovered that true love wasn't about never being afraid, but about having the courage to trust, even when afraid. And Arthur discovered that control was not synonymous with strength. He discovered that some of the best things in life happened precisely when everything went off script. He discovered that love wasn't about having all the answers, but about being present in the questions. One night, a few months later, while Oliver finally slept after hours of colic, Lily and Arthur were sitting on the sofa, exhausted but together. "Do you regret it?" Lily's question came low and vulnerable. Arthur looked at her, surprised. "What?" "All of this, the chaos, the sleepless nights, having your life turned upside down." Arthur took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Every day I used to wake up and be sure of how the day would be. I had total control over every aspect of my life, and it was completely empty. Now I wake up not knowing if I'll be able to have coffee before Oliver cries, not knowing if we'll have a quiet or chaotic night, not having control over anything." He smiled, looking at the crib where Oliver was sleeping. "And it's the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life." Lily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the peace that came from finally being home, not in a physical house, but in a connection that she chose to renew every day. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me." They stayed there in the comfortable silence they had built together, a silence that didn't need to be filled with words, because it was filled with presence. And they understood that that was the true transformation. Not a dramatic change that happened all at once, but small choices day after day to be present, to trust, to love even when it was difficult. Lily had learned that asking for help was not weakness, it was courage. Arthur had learned that controlling everything was not strength, it was fear. And together, they had learned that true love was not about big gestures or perfect promises. It was about choosing to stay. Every day, in the beautiful moments and in the difficult moments, when everything made sense and when nothing did. It was about being the constant presence that neither of them had had before, and building slowly a story that wasn't written in anyone's plans. But that was, without a doubt, the most important they had ever lived. Because in the end, it wasn't a dramatic gesture that changed everything. It was the silent decision, renewed at every dawn, to simply not leave. And sometimes, that is the most powerful thing someone can do, to remain. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Arthur and Lily has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, fear, courage, and true love, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment most marked you. Was it Lily's strength in facing everything alone? Was it Arthur's transformation in learning that control is not love? Or was it the moment he asked to be the father, not out of obligation, but by choice?